But if you close your eyes,
hi guys, welcome to an interesting video by Max. Today we're finally back with more Injustice Gods Among Us. So, from the last time I made a video till now, of course there's no updates, no new content, but what actually has happened is we've hit over 2,000 subscribers. So I'd like to thank each and every one of you for subscribing, and this will be the 2,000 subscribers special. And so I was thinking, what could we do for it, and I realized that there wasn't many people who made tier lists, and there definitely wasn't a video form one, so I decided to do that because I thought it'd be interesting. So this will probably be a really long video because we have a lot to cover, but if you guys can sit through it, then let's go for it. So before we do that, let's quickly do some updates. So the Killer Frost challenge is up, the Metahuman The Flash multiplayer season is up, and League of Assassins set is in rotation. So these two characters are really good, as you guys will see a little bit later on in the actual tier list, so you guys might want to go for that. In the store we have the we have the Rebirth Green Arrow pack, Killer Frost challenge pack, and the Alien Invasion pack. So before we get started with the tier list, actually I would like to commend the developers, because we have been getting a lot of good stuff recently, like the Regime Hawkgirl challenge, like the animated Batman Beyond challenge, and the Wally West Flash pack, which I did not actually need, but I do know that a lot of you guys would like that. So anyways, let's quickly try to jump into the tier list and try to cover this as quickly as possible. So first off, we gotta get a couple of things out of the way before we get into the actual tier list. So firstly is that this is completely my opinion, and I'm trying to be as neutral as possible, and this is what I think that they belong to. This is the tiers that I think the characters belong to, and of course some people will disagree, but this is just how I feel. So yeah, and also I'm assuming that every character is used optimally to their maximum potential. That means I'm assuming that we have the necessary gears to make them the best they can be, as well as the necessary teams to make them the best they can be. So for example, Flashpoint Aquaman may not be very good alone, but in the Flashpoint team he's really strong and makes his teammates very strong. So that's an example of the optimal usage of Flashpoint Aquaman. Yeah. And so before we get started on the actual tiers, I want to tell you guys that I've split it into 6 tiers of my naming, basically. So the top tier will be the OP tier, followed by the second tier, which is the very strong tier, and then the third tier, which is the strong tier, the fourth tier, which is above average, followed by average, and then below average. So OP basically means that, you know, pretty obvious, they're really strong, barely have any weaknesses, or they have really good abilities. And very strong is basically OP but with some glaring weakness or something that makes them slightly weaker than the characters in the OP tier. And for strong characters, basically they include those support characters, like let's say animated Harley Quinn, Batman Prime, something along those lines, as well as characters that are really good, but just not as good as the characters in the very strong and OP tier. So to give you guys some context, I would use the characters in OP tier, very strong tier, and good tier. So then we move on to the above average, which I will try to avoid using, but if worst comes to worst, I will still use them, which is basically just, you know, the abilities are slightly more underwhelming than all the tiers above them, but they are not particularly bad, just that you gotta use a lot of things to get them to perform optimally. Like you need a lot of gear, a lot of augments perhaps, mostly a lot of augments because their passives or stats aren't too good. And then we have the below average and average tiers. So below average being the worst tier. So for these two, I really wouldn't use characters in these tiers. So the below average tiers are characters that are completely just not good, and the average tier are just basically I just tried to be a bit nice with the naming, but really they are bad. They're just below average characters, but just that they have a redeeming quality of them, basically. So something just to prevent them from landing in that lowest tier. So without further ado, let's quickly get started into the tier list now that we've got all of that out of the way. So first off, we're going to start with the OP tier and we'll work our way down. So the OP tier firstly consists of the Flashpoint team. And I'm just going to talk about the entire team in general because they all, work in unison to make each other stronger. So Aquaman providing the main defense, Batman providing the offense, and Deathstroke just unleashing specials on people, especially with the Flashpoint team. And for me personally, I think that Aquaman is the most important piece of the puzzle, just because his defense and the reflect that he gets from it, he and his teammates get from it, is just really, really strong. Because we've all faced the Flashpoint team very, very often in the multiplayer, and basically I get annihilated by, okay, not really annihilated, but I get at least one character destroyed because of activating the special on the water shield, and I really, really hate that. So that's why the Flashpoint team is definitely in the OP tier. So next up we have the two Arkham characters, which are Batgirl and Batman. So for Batgirl, she seems a little bit more like a support card, but I will justify why she is in the OP tier because she can synergize with the Cloak of Destiny and become really, really potent with her special 1. And furthermore, her passive is really, really strong, which is the fact that she can save Arkham characters, and that has saved me from multiplayer defeats like countless number of times because my multiplayer team is Batman, Batgirl, and Arkham Knight. And spoiler alert, they're all in the OP tier, but I will justify why they're there. It's not because of biasness, but obviously I want to use good characters, so yeah. And lastly, she is what I would consider pretty recent, considering the fact that we have not gotten a lot of updates and characters. So a lot of characters I would consider pretty recent, even those from about a year ago. I would consider them pretty recent considering how little characters we've gotten recently. So yeah, her stats are pretty good. So next we have the Batman Ninja duo, which when working in unison do get a lot of extra abilities from each other. And I think that Batman's defense is watertight, and I really hate facing him on multiplayer because of his defense when he's outnumbered, plus some defensive gears like these that I'm showing you. I find it really, really irritating to face him, so yeah. And the Joker can heal from 0 to full health just with like one special, in spite of the quick engine being underwhelming. Although, okay, I did forget to mention Arkham Origins Batman just now. I kind of glossed over him, although I didn't mention him, but I think that it's pretty obvious why he's in the top tier. I think he is someone that everybody will agree is in the top tier because of his versatility, the fact that he can be immune to dot, he can be immune to crit, he can get 2 blasts of power, being an upgraded version of Arkham Origins Batman, he can be immune to power drain, and he can get crit boost and special 1 boost. It's just everything all in one package, and combined with really good stats and really good synergy with the Arkham team. Not much more you can ask for. So next is someone all the way behind, and that would be Raven Prime. And I did forget to mention at the start, one thing I did forget to mention at the start is that the order that I'm giving you guys within each tier is not in order of strongest to weakest or weakest to strongest. It's just that all of them belong in the tier, and I would say that all of them are about the same level unless I say so. So for example, for Raven, I do believe that she is slightly weaker than the other OP characters. She just barely slid into the OP tier. But because I think that her ability of swapping health twice is undeniably good, you can basically take the lives of 2 opponents essentially. But I find that a very big drawback of her is that she's a really old character, meaning that she has pretty low stats, at least compared to the current meta, which is why you probably don't find her on multiplayer very often anymore, although her ability is still pretty good. But I just think that because of her low stats, sometimes you might be able to bypass her passive if you have a special that is strong enough, which is why I say she barely sneaks into the OP tier. And next we have some Superman. So we have Injustice's Superman, which I think everybody can agree that should be in the OP tier because of the fact that he can keep on negating specials every time he tags in. And after him we have New 52 Superman, who can deal a lot of basic damage, especially when combined with New 52 Wonder Woman, who will supply him with power. And with his already very high stats due to the fact that he's a recent character, he can dish out a ton of basic damage. So I think that he should be in the top tier. So the last two characters I have in the top tier are characters that I feel that are basically basic damage dealers, but they do have some drawbacks due to the fact that they basically can only do basic damage. And those characters are Arkham Knight the Arkham Knight, as well as Metahuman the Flash. So these two can basically destroy like a single opponent with like one or two combos. The Flash after passive activation, and Arkham Knight just with gear and perhaps some augments. And you can basically just rip most people to shreds due to the high basic damage. So I just think that they do belong in the ultimate, the OP tier, because they can destroy opponents so easily. So next, we're going to move on to the very strong tier. So I'm going to talk about two characters that I don't have first, which is Arkham Origins Deadshot and Blackest Night Superman. So for Arkham Origins Deadshot, he does do area damage, which I feel that makes him really strong, and he has a support ability which does a power drain every 10 seconds when the Arkham character is tagged in. And combined with Synergy, the Arkham team, I do think that he's very strong. But I think that these abilities are really good, but just not good enough to get him to the top tier. So for Blackest Night Superman, I think that his strongest ability is the Unblockable immunity, because of the fact that some characters do rely on unblockable attacks, like Arkham Origins Deathstroke, and to some extent Metahuman the Flash and Arkham Knight, who is in the top tier. So that's the strongest part I think about him. I think the health gain and the part where you can heal back, I think that's not too strong. So yeah. So next up, I'm going to talk about three characters who are different but similar. So we're going to talk about Ares, Luchador Bane, and Cassandra Cain Batgirl. So basically, they are really good in terms of special damage, but they are just glass cannons basically. So Ares with his one hit special to nuke combined with like the Tantu Totem can destroy an entire team. Luchador Bane with like the League of Assassins knives and the Cloak of Destiny can destroy a team as well, and so does Batgirl. And Batgirl also can do 25% damage every time she tags in. But the common problem among all three of these characters is the fact that they all have pretty low health and they're basically glass cannons. So if you screw up or if the opponent has some form of protection, basically after you use your special, you're dead. So that's why they can't make it to the top tier, unlike the basic attackers who can actually survive if they kind of screw up. Like you can try to juggle with the basic attacks, which I have done on numerous occasions. I have actually won with Arkham Knight on 0 health a number of times because I was able to juggle my opponent with my basic attacks. So yeah. So next we're going to talk about two Blackest Night characters, which is Batman and Hawkgirl. So Hawkgirl, it's basically because she can revive her teammates, and that's pretty strong, and she has pretty high stats as well. And for Batman, I find that his synergy with of course, the entire Blackest Night team, considering that Superman and Hawkgirl are in the list as well. I find that his ability of dealing extra damage to opponents is pretty strong, especially because it scales up so quickly. And I think the 10% unblockable chance is the main part of him that makes him really strong, because that extra 30% chance is massive, although that is countered by Blackest Night Superman if there is one in the opposing team. So next up, I'm going to be talking about Dawn of Justice Batman, who I feel that does belong in the second top tier, which is the very strong tier. So as a matter of fact, I think that all three of the evasion characters, which are him, Reverse Flash, as well as Rebirth Wally West, all belong here just because of their evasive abilities. And for Batman, he is not really recent, but he's not too old either, so his stats are pretty decent. And all of their evasions are pretty high. So while I'm at it, I might as well talk about Reverse Flash and Rebirth Wally West. So basically, they all have good evasion, and Wally West can synergize with the rest of the Rebirth team. And for Reverse Flash, his cellular regeneration is really good, and I used to use him in my multiplayer team, but his very big drawback is that he is a pretty old character, and his stats just aren't too good. Like, he can get destroyed pretty easily by a basic damage dealer like Arkham Knight or Metahuman the Flash. Yeah. So next I'm going to be talking about Red Sun characters. So namely 4 of them who I believe does belong in this tier, which are Superman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, and Batman. So Batman is just because of his special one unblockable chance, which can mess up a team. And for Green Lantern, Superman, and Wonder Woman, which is what most people consider the best Red Sun team. Green Lantern because of the crit immunity, Superman because of the team passive damage, and Wonder Woman because of the power generation. Not too much to explain here, honestly. So we're just gonna move on. Next up, we're gonna talk about Arkham Knight Catwoman. So for Catwoman, the problem with her is that she has a really high attack and really low health. She is semi glass cannon. I say that because she doesn't just do all her damage output in one move, but rather she is a dot specialist, and her dots cannot be rinsed off even from tag out. And I did use her in my multiplayer team at one point in time. So I do consider her to be pretty good, and I think that her damage potential and damage output is really good, but just that her stats pull her down. And same for our next character, which will be Arkham Origins Deathstroke. I find that his stats aren't really good, but I find that his passive is really good because this unblockable crit special one can really destroy a person or a team. Like just a couple of these, and you've destroyed the team. So I found him to be pretty good, and I did use him in my original online team. So my very first online team was Deathstroke, Batman, and Harley Quinn. Basically, the Arkham Asylum pack. Yeah. So, yep, there's that. And next, we'll talk about the Earth 2 team. So I believe the entire Earth 2 team, which is Hawkgirl, Flash, and Solomon Grundy, all belong in this tier. I find that they all synergize really well with each other, and I do enjoy their passives. So they're kind of a lot based on stun. So as you guys can see, for Hawkgirl, we have a stun chance on combo ender and special, and we do have increased damage against stun for each Earth 2 teammate, which is really useful. And then Solomon Grundy does give 50% power generation reduction, which if paired with Killer Frost means that the opponent team cannot generate power. So now we're going to take a look at Earth 2 the Flash. So for him, we do have a chance to stun again on tagging. So there's the stun theme again, and Flash's attacks crit on stunned opponents. So it's similar to Hawkgirl, but it's just slightly different. Instead of having more damage, we have crit instead. So yeah, I find the last part of his passive not too useful. So that is the Earth 2 team. Although the problem is that we can't get Hawkgirl to Elite 10, so that is a problem. So next up, we have Killer Frost, who is the current challenge now. So she is a semi-support card because she does dampen power generation by 50%, which is really useful for you avoiding specials. So that is really useful indeed. But the thing that makes her better than a support card is the fact that I think that her special one Cold as Ice does have a lot of utility as well, because it slows down your opponent by so much. It can let you interrupt their combo and get in like a special way more easily. So I do think that she is pretty good. And next up we have Rebirth Raven. So for Rebirth Raven, I think that her passive of the stealing power is really strong, and timed correctly, she can be really strong specialist. And the second part of her passive, I think not too useful. So yeah, but I think that she's a pretty good card. And next we're going to take a look at Arkham Origins Joker. So Arkham Origins Joker, kind of the same story as Catwoman. He does a lot of dot damage, but his can be rinsed by tag out. But paired with the Arkham team, his dot damage is pretty strong, although his health is pretty low, and I have tried using him online to not too much success. But with the proper gears and proper characters on his team, like Harley Quinn to heal him, he can be pretty good. And the last two characters in this tier, we're going to take a look at two Wonder Woman. So that is Dawn of Justice Wonder Woman and New 52 Wonder Woman. So they are sort of team players as well, but they have pretty decent stats. So for Dawn of Justice Wonder Woman, we can get entire team health gain. So that is really, really strong. And there used to be a bug with her, I believe, but they did fix it, although they did not fix the Special 2 bug as of yet. And for New 52 Wonder Woman, I really love this passive, is that when she activates a special attack, her teammates, Justice League teammates, do get some power as well. So it can synergize really well with all her Justice League teammates because, I mean, it's really obvious. You activate specials and you get energy for more specials for other people. You can't get a better deal than that. So that's why I think that she does belong in the second top tier. Alright, so now we're going to be moving on to the good tier, which is basically, you know, more of the support cards and cards that are good but just not good enough to get to the top 2 tiers. So the first character I have here is Arkham Origins Bane. So he can synergize with the Arkham characters, but I find that his one-time passive of getting the bar of power, I just find it a little bit underwhelming, but he is still a pretty good card. He has decent stats and he can synergize with the Arkham team. And so next off we have Batman Prime, which basically just gives the entire team 25% damage boost, which is pretty good as a support. And then we have Arkham Origins Batman, who is pretty good. His combo can juggle very well, although after the latest update, not too much. But yeah, so his passive is just pretty simple. You just get 2 bars of power at the start. He used to be a really good character back in the day, up there with the Red Sun team. But currently, you know, he's fallen off a lot because of all the new characters. But starting the 2 bars of power is still useful. I mean, it could potentially eliminate one person from the get-go, so can't really fight too much with that. Next up, we have Batman Returns Catwoman, who is yet again another support card for dot characters. On her own, her stats are pretty lousy, and she just sucks basically. But you know, she can support a lot of dot characters, and that could come in really handy. So next up, we have Gaslight Batman, who is not here. So next up we have Gaslight Batman, and just because I find that his passive is pretty underwhelming, although he does have really good stats, being one of the most recent characters to be released, but I do find that his passive is a little bit gimmicky to me, and I find it a little bit too complicated. But of course, it being complicated is not what placed him in this list, but I find that the grenade just the burning is just underwhelming. The swarm of bats is an interesting mechanic about them missing the attacks, but I find that not really too good, not too useful. I mean, it does save you a little bit of damage. It could potentially save you, but it's not game changing in any way. So that's why he's only in the good tier, not in the very strong or the OP tier. And that is the same story with Rebirth Green Arrow, who I might as well just talk about now. So for him, his trick arrows, when he tags in and tags out, I find that the arrows you don't have enough control over them, so you don't really know what can happen. There are useful effects like the special disable arrow and like a freeze arrow, if I'm not wrong, but I just find it unreliable, and just, you know, it involves a lot of tagging in and out. And I find that his passive is a little bit hard to control, a little bit hard to utilize, which is why he's over here. But him being a pretty recent character, he is, you know, he does have pretty good stats, so he does have that going for him. So next up, I'm going to talk about the remaining 2 Red Sun characters, which is Deathstroke and Solomon Grundy. So out of the 2, I would say Solomon Grundy is better because giving a health boost is way better, and I find that Deathstroke is the worst Red Sun, just because 5% speed per character, meaning 15% speed in a Red Sun team. I find it not too good at all. I mean, it is useful in some ways, but I think 15% speed boost just not too good. I mean, definitely not useless, but it is just not as good as the rest, basically. So next up, we have the entire Suicide Squad team. So I would say that the most key piece of the Suicide Squad team is Deadshot. So for the 2 Jokers, the first Joker, the Suicide Squad Joker, his passive of taking less damage and dealing more damage for per Suicide Squad character is just average. I mean, dealing more damage, taking less damage is pretty good, but not a game-changing passive. And for Unhinged Joker, stealing the opponent's character is seemed to be pretty good at first, but you gotta realize that that character has no gear and starts off at really low health, so doesn't have too much utility, although it can, possibly block a couple specials for you, but just not as good as it could have been. And that it would be too overpowered probably, so I would say it's balanced. And Harley, not too much changes. I think the new item in the bag of tricks is nothing too big. I mean, the gain 1 bar of power could be pretty good paired with the Tantu Totem, so there is that. But I think that the best part about the Suicide Squad team is Deadshot's team passive, which is that it does allow the team to get an unblockable special off when he's assisting them. I find that that's the best part of the team. And yes. And so next up is John Stewart Green Lantern. Yet again, another support card that does give the team a lot of extra survivability. And there's that. So next up, I have Red Lantern. So now Red Lantern used to be really good when he first came out because you could spam his ultimate combined with John Stewart Green Lantern. But I think currently, I say that he's in this tier because he can basically still spam specials just that you die really quickly, but as a character himself, I can see him being useful in, just getting rid of a few characters, like doing some trades. Like he trades his health for damage and he eliminates people and then he takes himself out. But I can still see some usefulness in that. I mean, who doesn't like a character who just spams specials, right? And next up, I have all the Harley Quinn. So all of them pretty much the same story. They're all support cards with their special 2. They can give the team a damage boost and health boost. And all of them when paired with the Tantu Totem are really good because they can do that unlimitedly unless you do the bomb. So all of them can support the team really well. And each of them has a little bit something special about them, like Harley Quinn giving 20% extra damage and power generation and 40% to Jokers. Arkham Harley giving the unblockable chance to Arkham characters. So basically they're all pretty good support cards in their own right. And that's the same story with Hawkgirl, who does support characters that involve tanking and tanking out, such as we said just now, Rebirth Green Arrow, or other characters like Injustice 2 Superman, something like that. So she does have her uses. And next up we have Rebirth Jessica Cruz. And I find it really sad because I did use her in my main multiplayer team for a period of time. But the thing is that her passive is not too good. I think that Kilowog stun is not pretty good. Not too good. I find that the Lantern passive is not too good as well because I wouldn't really pair with the Lanterns. But what I do find really impressive about her is her combo ender, which has so many hits. And last time when paired with Raish Algo Scimitar and the Gauntlets of Azrael, she was just unstoppable. She drained people's power to nothing, and she gained an insane amount of health for her team, which she can still do for the health part. But for the power drain part, she can't do that anymore. She can only drain once like every other character in the game. So I find that took away from her power significantly, and I find that indirectly she got completely nerfed, but she is still good like stat wise, and her combo ender can still heal for every hit, so she is still good enough to be in this tier. And for our Killer Croc, who is the next character on this tier, his passive of getting some armor is pretty good. He has pretty decent stats, being a pretty recent character, and his extra armor is of course really useful. However, his attacks are pretty slow, which is what brings him down a lot, and why he places in this tier, not any tier above. And next up we have Regime Killer Frost. So it's just slightly worse off than Killer Frost because her passive is basically reduced healing and movement speed. But the reduced movement speed also applies to Killer Frost's special one, just that is not mentioned in her special. But her reduced healing of course does have a lot of utility, and her slow on her special, of course, is really useful as well, which is why she is still in this tier. And coming up on the last few characters now, next up is Classic Scorpion. So now Classic Scorpion, he is pretty recent as well. His stats are pretty high, and you can chain his heavy combo if you time it correctly, so that is pretty good. And next up we have his passive, which to be honest I don't find very overwhelming, but it is still a pretty decent passive, and I find that he does belong in this tier. So next up we have Shazam, everybody's favorite card from the gold pack that everybody wanted so much, including myself. So now for Shazam, it's pretty obvious. Everybody knows what he does. You activate your super and you can activate your special 2 twice. 4 times. So yeah, what's there to say about that? That's pretty good, especially if you give him good gears. Then he could be really strong. So after that is Antimatter Sinestro, whose force tag out and power drain really brings him up a lot. So his force tag out does have its uses, such as synergizing with the League of Assassins set, which at one point in time used to make him be able to destroy an entire team just using the League of Assassins set. But the synergy has since been nerfed, or rather the way the set works has been changed, basically indirectly nerfing him as well. So for him, his 2-bar power drain on special 1 is pretty big. I believe that is the largest power drain in the game, because I believe all the other characters drain like a bar and a quarter or a bar and a half, but he drains 2 bars, so that is pretty good. Although, considering that the opponent you're draining does tag out, so they do have some time to regenerate power, but I still find it to be pretty good. So next we have a Dawn of Justice Superman, who can shatter gear. But I find that he's just not too good, and the gear shattering does not come up often enough for it to be incredibly useful. I find that the chance is a little bit too low, but shattering gear of course does have its merits, such as shattering a 4th world set. That's huge, so that's why he is still good. And of course after we have Man of Steel Superman, which about the same thing. His percentage chance is a little bit too low of saving power, and his stats are pretty low considering he's a pretty old character. So, but he still is useful if you get lucky. So he's a pretty luck-based character. And next up we have Killing Joke Joker, who I almost consider to be a support character, because basically you sacrifice him and you gain power from him for the other 2 characters, and with those other 2 characters you can unleash hell on your opponent. And last up we have 600 Wonder Woman, who does give support to all female characters, and it's 30%, so that is larger than animated Harley Quinn's 20% for all characters. So for female characters, you are better off using 600 Wonder Woman, and she does have better stats than Harley. Yeah, so that would cover the good tier. Alright, so now I'll be moving on to the above average tier, and yeah, I do realize that this video is getting to be really long, but I really want to get in my tier list and share my opinion. So now the first character in the above average is Aquaman Prime. He is a pretty old character, but I think that he is slightly useful. I mean, his specialty is really cool. It's really unique, like no one else has it in the game, so there's that, and it could be used in some situations. I would use him rarely, but I still would use him. And next is Animated Batman Beyond, and I find that his passive is pretty unique as well. It gives extra crit chance and crit damage, so crit chance, crit damage, and basic attacks. And when he first came out, I did use him a lot because I found him really enjoyable to play. Not to mention his super move has a really cool Batmobile, which of course is not a factor in considering the tier list, but just like to mention that for fun. And after that we have Kondak Black Adam. So for him, he has pretty good stats. However, I find that the drawback of him is that his passive is really weak. So The problem with it is that the power drain and the dot is really little, and that amounts to nearly nothing. So I think that it just isn't good. And about the same with Amikami Catwoman's passive as well. The chance to apply the bleed is only 25%, and the chance is so low that it makes her passive almost useless, much like Conduct Black Adam. So next up we have someone who I feel really sad that's in this tier, and that's Apocalypse Darkseid. So he used to be pretty good, but they didn't nerf him to the ground. So I would say that if he wasn't nerfed, he probably would have been in the very good tier, the very strong tier. But because of the fact that now his bleeding does have a cap, and yeah, so I just think that, and I forgot what it's called, but the one that makes the opponent susceptible to crit. It just both got nerfed, so it just isn't too good anymore. But I do really like him as a character. And next we're going to talk about Doomsday Prime. So Doomsday Prime actually, in spite of being in this tier, I find that he is kind of above where he should be, considering how most gold characters in the gold pack who isn't a support card will be in the lower tiers. His healing passive is really strong, especially for a new player starting out, and even for other players, the healing passive is always useful. Although his heavy attack is pretty slow, so that is kind of a drawback. And next up we have Containment Doomsday, who is, I don't know, I find him a bit of a unique character. He can revive 3 times, so sort of Solomon Grundy-esque, and he does get more damage and more power every time he revives, so I do really like that. But the fact of the matter is that his health is pretty low, even counting all his revived health, and his damage is pretty low as well, so he has pretty low stats and just not too good, basically. Next up we have Yellow Lantern Hal Jordan. So he is a pretty recent character coming out at the same time as Batgirl, so his stats are pretty good. But I find that his passive is not too good. I mean, in terms of the characters in this tier, I would say he is pretty high up on this tier, almost jumping to the tier above him. But his passive relies on your opponent tagging out, and the part of the passive that gives extra damage against other lanterns is just not too useful, because you're more likely to face a opponent who's not a lantern than compared to an opponent who is a lantern. So it's just not too useful. So for Crypto Lex, he also rises a little bit above his where I think he should have been, but he does give a 30% increase to maximum health, and also he has a power drain, so he is pretty useful by himself as well. Actually, in fact, I think that he should perhaps be in the tier above him, but I just find that he is pretty weak on his own, so yeah. And next time we're going to take a look at Bounty Hunter Lobo. For him, he is very glass cannon, and he's just not very strong in general. His health is way too low. His damage is fine, I suppose, but his passive is dot based as well. But I just find that he doesn't have enough survivability to refresh his dot at all. Although I do love his character design. Just look at that character design; looks so cool. But yeah, just not too good. Next up, we have Martian Manhunter, who is one of the very old challenges. So I find that his passive does have some uses, like it can stun and it can power drain. So it is pretty useful, and he would be slightly above some characters in this list, in this tier. I mean, but he just isn't. He just isn't too good. Basically, that's the case for every character in this tier. They just aren't too good, basically, which is why they're just above average. After we have New 52 Nightwing, who is here because he has a power drain, and also his passive is pretty alright. I mean, 3 seconds extra damage after tag in is like a fine passive. And the power drain is what mainly makes him here. After that, we have Teen Titans Raven. So for Teen Titans Raven, I find her passive to be just alright. Same story of Amikami Catwoman, 25% Not 25% chance. 25% health and power is fine, but the chance is just a little bit too low. So it doesn't activate nearly enough for it to be effective, which is the main problem. And after that, we have the Scorpion duo, not including Classic Scorpion. So for both of them, I do believe MKX is better than the original, but I find that they just aren't too good. MKX does automatically crit, but it is pretty difficult to crit his attacks in my experience. So yeah, that is not too good. And the original Scorpion is a character that I really like. I used to use him a lot back in the day, a couple of years ago when I didn't have two strong characters. He's one of my strongest characters, and I enjoyed using him. But it doesn't change the fact that his stats are low and his passive not too useful. So unfortunately, for Scorpion, he is only in the above average tier. And after that, we have Static. So Static would be someone who is slightly higher, ranked higher on this tier as well, because his passive, immune to power drain, basically makes him an improved version of Lobo, who is going to be in the tier below this. But his blocking, giving him power, is a pretty useful passive, but nothing too game changing. So yeah. And we have the last couple characters in this tier. We have Godfall Superman, who is I don't know, pretty useful, and especially combined with like the Gingle Soda. But the problem with this is that even though when you block you don't take damage, but the problem is that since you reflect the damage, your opponent gains power faster than you, even though you do gain power while blocking. So it basically means they can activate a special before you every time, and I find that that's a major drawback of Godfall Superman. So that's why he isn't too good. And next up we have Zatanna and Zod, who are the final two characters of this tier, and also the final two characters in the gold tier. So for Zatanna, she is alright. She is also, her stats aren't too good, but she does have some pretty useful things that you can do with the Deck of Fate, like a stun and like a heal. So she is, useful in some circumstances, and Zod as well. The thing I really don't like about Zod is how to get him to his full potential, you have to wipe out the other two characters in your team. So I just don't really like that, and he has pretty low stats as well, so just not too good. And next, we're going to talk about the last two tiers, who is, pretty. They do have really little characters because there aren't a lot of characters that are completely lousy in this game. So yeah. So next, we're going to take a look at the average tier, who is basically bad, but they just have one thing about them that makes them slightly usable, but I wouldn't use any of these characters. So the first character that we have in this tier is Batman Beyond. Basically, he has terrible stats, but his passive of being immune to stun does have some usability, considering how certain characters do rely on stun, like the Earth 2 team and like Luchador Bane. So yeah, some slight usability there. And next we have Regime Black Adam. So he is about the same story. He has terrible stats, but his rings are basically really irritating. So that's just why he does have some usability. And really, if you think about it, if you activate a really strong move against that ring, you could potentially damage yourself a ton, much like how Aquaman's Water Shield works. But I just think that he is just too weak to be very usable at all. And after that, we have Teen Titans Cyborg. So Teen Titans Cyborg is pretty much bad in every way, except that you can regenerate health while tagged out. So that does give him some extra survivability. So it can be used in some circumstances. And the next character is very sadly Darkseid. So Darkseid, I really loved him, and back when I started playing the game, I really wanted to get my hands on Darkseid because he was so cool, and I really loved him. But the problem is that his stats they're not really low, but they are low, and his attacks are slow, his special 2 sucks, and his passive to me is useless, because even a bronze character with times 3 stats will never meet a gold character, especially the top gold characters. And even those, it'll barely even meet the bottom tier gold characters in terms of stats, so it just doesn't cut it. And the bronze passives aren't really good, so there is just nothing that would make you want to use a bronze card over a gold card on a team, unfortunately. And you can't really use him for like challenge one of the challenge either, because he is a gold card after all. And next up we have Mana Steel General Zod, whose passive is basically like it's just boring and plain Jane. All it does is reduce damage. Of course, that is useful, which is why he is not in the completely useless tier. But it's just very uncreative and just doesn't do much. So Arrow, Green Arrow, his passive is pretty interesting. He can have a chance to freeze, which I think the only one that's actually useful is the freeze, because basically it's a stun. Like the poison and the burn, not burn, but rather the explosive arrow, just not useful at all. His stats are really low, and yeah, just not too good. And next up, really sad to see her here, but we have the newly acquired Regime Hawkgirl, who really just isn't very good at all. Like, all she does is disable opponent's special for just a while, and her special 2 crit is pretty useful, but I think overall she's just not too good, because all she does is disable opponent's special. Granted that is a pretty good thing, but she can't do much else other than disabling opponent's special, so can't really capitalize on that. So next we're going to talk about Lobo, who's basically now has been reduced to a watered down version of Static, with basically worse stats and a worse passive, basically. And we have Green Lantern Sinestro. And Green Lantern Sinestro, the really sad thing about him is that his passive is not bad, but it's just that it relies on opponents tagging out. So it is something very hard to control unless you're Anti-Matter Sinestro, which he is not. So it's just something really hard to control, and I find that his passive is really hard to activate against AI, which is every fight you're fighting against AI, so that makes his passive pretty bad. But it is actually a good passive if the opponent does actually tag out once, a couple times when you're in, so it does have usability. Next is Boss Solomon Grundy, who's just beside Sinestro, coincidentally. And for him, his problem is that his attack is really low. His health is technically low by today's standards, but it's not too bad. But his attacks are really, really slow, and his main problem is that his attacks are really, really slow. For like Earth 2 Solomon Grundy, it's forgivable because he can shatter gear and he can reduce power generation, so he's playing more of a support role. But for Boss Solomon Grundy, he is more of an offensive role because his passive does give him increased offensive power as his health gets lower. But the problem is that we can't capitalize on that because our attacks are just way too slow and we'll just get interrupted. So that is a major problem, which is why he just isn't too good. But he does have some usability, of course, especially at lower health. And for the last character in this tier, that would be Insurgency Joker. So he basically has really low health. His damage is, slightly better than some other gold pack cards. But the only thing that saves him slightly is that the fact that he does take out, I believe, about 40% health when he dies. So that could be very useful in certain situations, I guess. And I do love his combo. It's really, really smooth, unlike all the new Jokers. So the old Joker's combos were pretty smooth. And now we're going to move on to the last tier, which is the below average tier, which are characters I consider to be, just completely bad, like nothing good about them at all. So first one is Bane Prime. So for Bane Prime, his stats are terrible and his passive only activates once and it barely does much to change anything, I guess. And also same story for pretty much all of them, actually. Insurgency Batman. Stats are bad, and the passive just isn't very useful at all, in my opinion. And then after that, we are jumping all the way to the end. And next up, we have Superman. Both, and actually not both, a couple of Superman. So we first have Superman Prime, whose one-time activation for faster speed I consider to be nearly useless. It doesn't really do much at all. And then we have Prison Superman, whose one-time activation of health gain does increase his survivability slightly, but I just feel that it doesn't make much of a difference in the game. And then finally we have Regime Superman. And Regime Superman, about the same story as the previous two Superman actually, which is the fact that he has a one-time activation when he's below 40% health, and it only lasts for 6 seconds, so you can barely make a difference within that short span of time. And we're down to our final 2 cards of this tier and off the entire tier list. And so next up we have Regime Raven, who I have scrolled past already. So Regime Raven, about the same story as all 3 Superman. She only activates her passive once when below 40% health, and the power drain is just too underwhelming. I mean, you can get more power drain with a power drainer like Nightwing or Lex Luthor or other power drainers, so her passive just is basically useless, essentially. And lastly, we have Regime Wonder Woman. So her passive of gaining power while blocking, she just gains way too little power for it to be of any use. So that's just the problem with that. Is she just gains way too little power for the use. Although back in the day, when she was first released, she was very strong because she gained so much power from a hit. She just stood there blocking and could just spam specials. But unfortunately for her, currently that is not the case, and yeah, she just isn't too good. And now, before we end off the super long video, I want to quickly look through the silver cards. So I'll just tell you guys which silver cards and bronze cards I think are good. So for the silver cards, I consider, of course, the 3 support cards to be good. Lex Luthor for health, Harley Quinn for damage, and the most useful will be Green Lantern for energy. And then I like Nightwing, who does take reduced damage and does do power gen. I think Nightwing probably the best silver card, and the Flash falling closely behind. He does a lot of damage and he is really fast. So yeah, I would say the best silver team is Flash, Nightwing, and Green Lantern. And although I personally like Deathstroke, and in terms of silver cards, Black Adam isn't too bad in silver tier because his reflect does actually do quite a ton of damage in silver tier. I really like Cyborg as well because his power generation when tagged out is really good. You can come in with a power punch, I believe it's called, the power fist, and you can eliminate somebody sometimes. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the silver tier. Solomon Grundy is still pretty lousy in spite of his revive. Oh, I forgot about Wonder Woman. So Wonder Woman is also a really strong character, so she should be in the main silver team as well. So it's a toss-up between Wonder Woman, the Flash, Nightwing, and Green Lantern, depending on what you're looking for. Although if you do plan on using Wonder Woman, you probably should use Green Lantern so that you do have specials to use when you do get increased special damage. So yeah. So for bronze tier, it is almost the same actually. So we still have Flash and Nightwing being the best 2 characters. And I would say Lex Luthor follows behind as a third. So he does give increased damage instead of health in the bronze tier. And he does have a power drain. Nightwing has a power drain as well. He has damage mitigation, pretty much making him the best character. And the Flash is really fast. And I don't know, I do find his passive pretty useful. The speed boost pretty useful. And the other characters are just just average. They're all about the same, more or less. Now, nobody stands out too much. So anyways, guys, thanks. If you actually made it to the end all the way here, and you're hearing this, thanks for watching this super long video, and goodbye.